They told him the cabin was cursed, that anyone who spent a night inside would hear voices calling their name, and footsteps pacing the hall when no one was there. But when war veteran Daniel Harris saw that old wooden cabin listed for just $500, he didn't see a curse. He saw a chance to start over. What he didn't know was that his loyal dog, Max, would uncover something buried deep beneath those rotting floorboards, something that had been waiting for decades to be found. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe, because the story you're about to hear will remind you that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried forever. Daniel Harris had never imagined that buying a cabin could feel like stepping into another world. After 12 years of military service, he returned home carrying scars that no one could see, a mind crowded with memories he didn't know how to release, and a heart searching desperately for a place to breathe. The idea of solitude, of escaping the noise of everyday life, had been the only thing keeping him moving forward. When he saw the listing for a cabin in the local paper, a simple, almost careless ad promising a property for $500, he felt something stir inside him, a mixture of curiosity, hope, and a faint thrill of rebellion against all the warnings he had received. The locals had cautioned him, of course. They spoke in hushed tones about the cabin's history, about the man who had disappeared decades ago, about voices that could be heard at night and lights that flickered when no one was supposed to be there. Some even claimed the people who tried to live there for more than a night never came back in the same state of mind, carrying a kind of unease that lingered for months, even years. Daniel listened politely, even smiled, but the warnings rolled off him like water on stone. He had survived the chaos of war. A little old cabin in the woods seemed like nothing compared to that. The journey to the cabin was long, winding through dense woods where the trees grew so close together that the sunlight barely reached the gravel road. The further he drove, the more the world behind him seemed to fade his past. The city, the reminders of all the expectations he felt he had failed to meet. In the rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of his own reflection. Tired, haunted, yet strangely determined. Max, his loyal German shepherd, sat beside him, ears perked, nose twitching as if he could sense the history lingering in the air. The cabin appeared suddenly, framed by towering pines that leaned inward like silent sentinels. Its paint was faded, the roof sagging in places, and the windows clouded with years of dust and grime. The front porch sagged under its own weight, the steps creaking ominously as Daniel stepped onto them. Yet, despite its state of decay, there was something inviting about it, something that whispered of possibility and solitude. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood, mold, and memories long left to rot. The walls were warped, the floors uneven, and the fireplace was nothing more than a dark cavity of soot and ash. Daniel ran his hands along the surfaces, brushing away cobwebs and loose dirt, feeling the rough texture of the wood beneath his fingers. It was imperfect, yes, but it was his, in a way no other place had ever been. As he explored, Max padded quietly behind him, sniffing every corner, growling softly at shadows that seemed to move in the flickering light of the afternoon sun streaming through the broken panes. Daniel's mind wandered to the stories he had heard, the rumors of hauntings and disappearances, but he dismissed them. He had faced bullets, explosions, and the unrelenting chaos of war. A haunted cabin in the woods could not compare. Yet, a subtle tension coiled in the back of his mind, a small, persistent knot of unease that he could not quite shake, as if the cabin itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The silence inside was almost too complete. Even Max, usually so alert and vocal, moved cautiously, ears flat, nose low, as though sensing that the air itself was charged with something unseen. Daniel began unpacking the few belongings he had brought, placing them carefully on the uneven wooden floor, each sound amplified in the emptiness. He paused near the fireplace, listening. Was that a whisper? He shook his head, convincing himself it was just the wind slipping through the cracks. He moved on, checking the corners, opening drawers that stuck, and brushing away years of dust. Each movement stirring the cabin's long-forgotten presence. Despite the warnings, the decay, and the stories, a sense of anticipation began to grow. Something about the cabin felt alive, not in a threatening way, but as if it were aware of his presence, as if it had been waiting for him all this time. Daniel felt a mixture of dread and exhilaration. The cabin, abandoned and shunned, seemed to reflect his own fractured state. He had offered a strange promise. A chance to rebuild, to claim a space untouched by others, a sanctuary where he could finally confront his past. Max padded over to a corner, sniffing insistently, nudging at the floor with his paw, and Daniel followed, feeling that he was on the verge of discovering something just out of reach, a secret waiting patiently for the right moment, for the right person, to reveal itself. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the cabin itself was leaning closer, listening, assessing, ready to share its story with someone willing to pay attention. And Daniel knew, deep down, that his life was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine after stepping inside the cabin. Daniel felt a strange mix of relief and unease. For the first time since leaving the military, he had a place that was entirely his own, untouched by anyone else's expectations, filled only with the weight of silence and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Yet that silence wasn't comforting, it was heavy, almost palpable, pressing against his chest as he moved through the small, dusty rooms. Max, his loyal companion, stayed close to his side, ears alert, nose twitching at every sound. There was something about the cabin that seemed to watch them both, as if it had been waiting for someone to return. Daniel's warhound instincts refused to ignore it. He had faced danger in open fields and foreign cities, but this felt different. Here, the danger was hidden, quiet, patient. He unpacked slowly, arranging the few belongings he had brought, trying to make the cabin feel like home. Each item he placed on the warped wooden surfaces seemed to stir the space, as though the cabin itself responded to his presence. The fireplace, long unused, became a focal point, and he ran his hands over the soot-stained bricks, feeling their cold, rough texture. Max sniffed along the edges, pawing at the dust, as if he sensed layers of time and secrets embedded in the walls. Daniel shook his head, trying to dismiss the feeling creeping up his spine. He had come seeking peace, not ghosts. As the sun began to dip behind the trees outside, shadows stretched across the floor, turning corners into unknown spaces. Daniel lit a few candles he had brought, their flickering flames casting dancing shapes on the walls. The wind outside whispered through the cracks in the windows, a faint moan that sounded almost like a sigh. Max growled low in his throat, tail stiff, ears pinned back. Daniel crouched beside him, whispering reassurances he barely believed himself. He knew his dog was sensitive, often reacting to things humans couldn't see, but the intensity of Max's unease was unsettling. That night, as Daniel lay on the creaking bed, the cabin seemed to breathe around him. The floorboards shifted underfoot with every sound from the outside branches scraping against the walls, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of leaves, and then came the first unmistakable noise. A faint knock, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep within the cabin. Daniel froze, his heart pounding, straining to listen. Max's growl grew louder, more urgent, and the dog pressed against his side, refusing to move. He reached for his flashlight, scanning the dim room, and the beam caught a corner where the shadows seemed to gather unnaturally, as if hiding something. Daniel rose slowly, each step measured, tension coiling in his muscles. He checked the windows, the doors, even the old cabinets, finding nothing but dust and decay. He told himself it was the wind, the settling of an old house, his imagination running wild. But Max refused to be convinced. The dog's stare was fixed, unwavering, directed at a spot near the fireplace where the floorboards looked worn, as though something beneath them had been disturbed. Daniel felt an odd tug in his chest, a mixture of fear and curiosity. He moved closer, running a hand over the boards, tapping lightly. Max whimpered, pawing insistently at the same place. There was a rhythm to the cabin now, a heartbeat beneath the wood and stone. Daniel began to understand that he wasn't alone, that this place had a memory of its own, waiting for someone to uncover it. The old stories, the warnings of the locals, the sense of unease he had tried to dismiss, all of it felt real now, pressing against the edges of his consciousness. And yet, despite the fear, he felt a strange pull toward the mystery, a desire to uncover what had been hidden for so long. Max nudged his hand toward the floor, insistent, as if trying to guide him to something he could not yet see. and Daniel realized that the cabin's secrets were not going to reveal themselves without a little help from the one being who understood it best. The knocks came again that night, louder, more insistent, echoing through the small cabin like a rhythm Daniel could not ignore. Sleep had been elusive, replaced by a tense awareness that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. Every creak, every groan of the old wood felt amplified, as though the cabin were alive, listening, responding to each cautious movement he made. Max stayed at his side, body rigid, eyes wide, ears flicking toward the corners of the room where shadows pooled unnaturally. Daniel tried to steady his breathing, telling himself it was nothing more than old wood shifting, a stray animal scratching outside, or the wind pressing against the walls. But there was a certainty in the dog's behavior that gnawed at the edge of his rational mind. By the third night, Daniel had begun noticing patterns. The knocks always came from the same area near the fireplace. Soft at first, then insistent. Max would growl, pacing in front of the corner, refusing to be calmed. Daniel's curiosity, which had once been cautious, now burned with a stubborn intensity. He had survived years in combat, navigated chaos and danger in places far removed from home. Yet something about this cabin unsettled him in a way that war never had. There was a weight here, a presence that seemed to hover just beyond perception, watching, waiting, patient in a way that felt almost human. He began exploring more methodically, checking every inch of the floorboards, running his hands along the warped walls, knocking lightly on panels, and listening for hollow sounds. Max followed closely, sniffing, circling, and occasionally letting out a low warning growl when Daniel approached the fireplace. Something about that corner felt different. The air was colder, heavier, almost viscous, and the scent of dust mixed with something else. Something faintly metallic, almost like iron. Daniel crouched, brushing away debris, tugging at the edges of the floorboards. Max pressed his nose to the surface, pawing insistently, whining softly, as though urging him to dig deeper. The more Daniel observed, the more he felt a growing connection to the space, a sense that the cabin's history and his own presence were intertwined in ways he could not yet articulate. Shadows shifted in unnatural ways when he wasn't looking directly at them, and faint drafts carried whispers that seemed almost like voices. Fragments of sentences he could not fully comprehend. Each night ended with Daniel and Max huddled together, the weight of anticipation pressing down, the unanswered questions stretching into the darkness, leaving him acutely aware that the cabin was holding its breath, waiting for a moment that had finally come within reach. Max's behavior grew more insistent with each passing night. Daniel had learned to follow the dog's lead, recognizing that Max sensed things he could not. The moment he stepped into the cabin, the air seemed to thicken, the silence deepening to an almost tangible weight. Max would immediately trot to the living room, circling the same corner near the fireplace, pulling at the warped floorboards and whining with a persistence that made Daniel's chest tighten. It was frustrating and unnerving. At the same time, Max was more alert than any human Daniel had ever known, reacting to stimuli invisible to the eye, yet palpably present. The veteran, trained to trust instinct, knew he couldn't ignore it. He had learned that in war, hesitation could be fatal, and maybe this was no different. Danielle started keeping a small journal, noting Max's actions, the time of the sounds, and the patterns he observed. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the dense pines surrounding the cabin, Max's unease seemed to grow. The knocks, once sporadic, had developed a rhythm that matched the dog's frantic pacing, as if the cabin itself were responding to their presence. Daniel began experimenting, moving objects, shifting furniture, tapping on different sections of the floor to see if the noises would react. Max barked and growled, refusing to let him stray from the corner that had captured the dog's full attention. The tension between curiosity and fear began to gnaw at Daniel. He found himself standing there for hours, flashlight in hand, eyes scanning the dim shadows, listening to the faint whispers of the wind in the house. Sometimes he swore he heard faint breathing, a low exhale coming from beneath the floorboards. Other times, he caught glimpses of shadows moving in ways that made no sense, shapes that vanished the moment he blinked. Max, unwavering, remained fixed on the same spot, pawing insistently, letting out low whines that seemed almost like warnings. The cabin had become a place of observation and anticipation, a puzzle with pieces that only the dog could sense, but not yet fully reveal. By the fourth night, Daniel could no longer deny that the cabin had something buried beneath its worn floors. The old structure creaked in response to his movements, groaning as if displeased with his intrusion. But he couldn't stop. Max's persistence had taken on a desperate quality, and Daniel felt the tug of urgency in his chest. Something about the dog's energy made it impossible to ignore the cabinet's secrets, and Max was determined to show him the way. The veteran began tapping and prying at the floorboards near the fireplace, testing each one for hollow spots. Max barked sharply, nudging Daniel toward a section that seemed more worn, more out of place than the others. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. What could be hidden here? He thought of the stories he had dismissed, the warnings of locals, the rumors of disappearances, and the eerie tales of past occupants. All of it seemed suddenly plausible, grounded in the strange synchronicity between the cabin's noises and Max's behavior. He crouched, examining the boards carefully, and realized that the nails were rusted but uneven, suggesting that someone had deliberately reinforced some parts while neglecting others. Max pawed at the same spot again, whining urgently, and Daniel felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. There was a mixture of fear and exhilaration, the kind that comes when standing on the edge of the unknown. The dog's persistence had turned his curiosity into obsession. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he prepared to remove the first board, knowing that the moment he did, the truth of the cabin would start to reveal itself. Max's eyes locked onto a silent affirmation, and the veteran understood that this discovery was not his alone. It was a partnership. Together, they were on the verge of uncovering something hidden, something long forgotten but waiting for the right moment and the right pair to be revealed. Daniel's fingers pressed against the edges of the warped floorboard, the wood rough under his calloused hands. Max's low growl reverberated in the room, his body tense, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the spot that had commanded his attention for nights. Daniel took a deep breath, the tension in his chest tightening as he prepared to lift the first board. The cabin seemed to hold its breath with him, the shadows stretching across the walls in anticipation. Every creak, every whisper of the wind outside felt amplified, as though the house itself were aware of what he was about to do. He pried gently, nudging the board with a screwdriver he had brought, and it resisted at first, old nails holding it stubbornly in place. Max pawed impatiently, whining, his ears flicking back toward the fireplace, as if urging Daniel to hurry. With a sharp snap, the nails finally gave way, and the board lifted just enough to reveal a dark cavity beneath. Dust and cobwebs spilled into the air, and the faint scent of damp earth rose up. Daniel's heart pounded as he peered inside, his flashlight illuminating the darkness below. The hollow space was narrow, but deep enough to hide something significant. Max's whine turned into an excited bark, and he pressed against the edge of the opening, sniffing vigorously. Daniel knelt beside him, shining the light deeper, and saw the faint outline of a trapdoor embedded in the floor below. The wood was aged and splintered, yet reinforced with rusted iron hinges. Someone had gone to great lengths to conceal this. Daniel's pulse quickened as he realized he was standing above a secret that had been hidden for decades, a part of the cabin's history that no one had dared to touch. Max's insistence had been more than intuition. He had led Daniel to something intentionally concealed, something that had been waiting for discovery. The veteran's hands shook slightly as he ran them over the trapdoor, feeling the grooves and notches, the faint carving that almost seemed deliberate. He glanced down at Max, who pawed again, tail wagging with cautious excitement. The dog's presence grounded him, reminding him that he was not alone in this moment, that the curiosity and courage needed to uncover this secret were shared between them. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, and slowly lifted the trapdoor. The hinges creaking loudly in protest, the darkness beneath seemed to swallow the light of the flashlight, an abyss filled with the weight of years and untold stories. He knelt, peering into the opening, straining to see what lay within. The smell of earth and wood filled his nose, mingling with the faint metallic tang of something old and forgotten. Max sniffed eagerly, pawing at the edge as if urging Daniel to move faster. The cabin seemed to exhale around them, the walls creaking and groaning as if responding to the intrusion. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. What could have been hidden here? Treasures. Memories. Warnings left behind by someone who had wanted this place to remain untouched. The anticipation tightened in his chest. The tension in the air almost unbearable. Asterisk, as Daniel reached deeper, brushing aside dust and debris. The first glimpse of something unusual caught his eye. A wooden surface, darker than the surrounding cavity, appeared to be the top of a chest or box, embedded carefully and deliberately. Max barked sharply, nudging Daniel with his nose, insistent and urgent. The veteran's heart leaped. He realized that the dog had found it first, sensed it carefully. He pried the lid open, the rusty hinges groaning under the sudden movement. A musty smell of old paper and damp wood filled the air, making him cough slightly. Max leaned closer, sniffing at the opening, his tail stiff with anticipation. Inside, the chest was filled with letters, dozens of them, tied in faded ribbons and stacked neatly. Their paper was yellowed, edges curled and fragile with age, but each seemed preserved with a deliberate care that made Daniel's stomach tighten. As he lifted the first bundle, a strange realization struck him. The letters were addressed to someone named Samuel Harris, his grandfather's name. The weight of that discovery was immediate, pressing down on Daniel's chest as he sank to his knees beside the chest, Max curling at his side. The letters were personal, filled with the voice of a woman writing with desperation and longing. She spoke of loneliness, of fear, and of men who had visited their home under cover of darkness. Her words revealed a trust betrayed, a life threatened, and a sense of isolation that gnawed the soul. The letters painted a picture of a household haunted not by ghosts, but by human deceit and danger. The type of betrayal that left scars invisible to the eye but deep within the heart. Daniel's hands trembled as he read, the words resonating in ways he could not have anticipated. Each letter seemed to pull him deeper into a past that was both foreign and intimately connected to him. Max whined softly, nudging Daniel's hand toward another bundle of letters. The dog's insistence was almost protective, a silent understanding that these letters were more than historical artifacts. They were keys to understanding a story that had remained untold for decades. Daniel began to notice details that connected the letters to his own family history. Stories of bravery, loyalty, and betrayal intertwined with the letters' ominous undertones. The cabin, the chest, the letters, they were all part of a puzzle that had been waiting for the right person to assemble. And Daniel now realized he had stepped into the center of it. Hours passed as he read, the candlelight flickering across the pages and casting shadows that danced along the walls. The more he read, the more he understood that these letters were not just documents. They were confessions, warnings, and memories preserved in paper, a bridge to a past that someone had tried desperately to hide. Max remained vigilant, ears twitching, eyes scanning the corners, as if aware that the story contained within the chest was alive in its own way, capable of influencing the present. Daniel felt a mixture of reverence and dread, knowing that each word brought him closer to a truth that was both personal and unsettling. A secret that had remained untouched for decades, but was now rising to meet him in the quiet, shadowed cabin. He paused, glancing at the topmost letter, noticing a faint symbol pressed into the paper, an insignia that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. The feeling of connection, of standing on the threshold of uncovering something monumental, weighed heavily on him. Max pressed closer, his warm body a reassuring anchor. And Daniel knew that the cabin had finally revealed its first layer of secrets, and that the letters held more than words. They held a story that would demand attention, courage, and perhaps a reckoning that neither he nor the cabin could ignore. Daniel froze as he unfolded one of the letters, the candlelight flickering across the fragile paper. His eyes widened when he reached a paragraph describing a photograph. Someone standing beside another man, a figure that Daniel immediately recognized in the mental mirror of his own face. The words painted a picture so vivid that he could almost see it before him. A young soldier, proud and upright, with a presence both commanding and familiar, standing next to another man whose features were uncannily similar. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His grandfather, Samuel Harris, had known this man. The resemblance was too strong to be coincidence. Daniel's pulse quickened, his hands trembling as he traced the lines of the letter. It wasn't just a photograph. It was a connection to a past he had never fully understood, a bridge between generations, a living echo of family secrets long buried. Max whimpered softly at his side, nose nudging Daniel's arm as if sensing the emotional weight of the discovery. The dog had led him to this moment, had insisted, night after night, that there was more beneath the floorboards than just dust and decay. And now, Daniel understood. Max had been following instinct, intuition tuned to things humans couldn't perceive. The cabin had guided them, and the dog had acted as a messenger between the hidden past and the present. Daniel leaned back, trying to absorb the significance of what he was holding. The photograph, described in the letter, wasn't just an image, it was a revelation. He carefully continued through the letters, each one revealing pieces of a story that had been deliberately concealed. There were mentions of clandestine meetings, of a soldier who had betrayed trust, of secrets hidden from the world. The more Daniel read, the more the narrative felt personal, as though the cabin itself had preserved these letters specifically for him. The words spoke of loyalty, tested, of choices made in shadows, and of the weight of consequences that stretched across decades. It became clear that the photograph wasn't merely evidence. It was a testament, a frozen moment capturing relationships, decisions, and betrayals that had shaped the family's history in ways Daniel had only glimpsed in vague, half-remembered stories. Max's growl cut through the quiet, low and insistent, drawing Daniel's attention back to the chest. Beneath the letters, there was something else, a small, iron-bound box tucked carefully in the corner of the trunk, hidden beneath layers of paper and ribbon. The chest, already a revelation, seemed almost too pulse with significance now that Daniel's curiosity was fully engaged. He reached for it cautiously, aware that opening it could uncover truths more unsettling than he could anticipate. His fingers grazed the cold metal, tracing the edges, feeling the weight of history pressed into the object. Daniel realized the connection between the letters, the photograph, and the box beneath. This was not just a collection of old items. It was a carefully preserved record of lives intertwined with loyalty, deceit, and long-hidden truths. Each element was deliberate, each piece a puzzle waiting to be solved. Max pressed closer again, tail stiff, eyes unblinking, urging him forward. Daniel's heart pounded as he lifted the lid of the small iron box slightly, peering inside. There was a metallic glint within that caught the candlelight, and he recognized it instantly as something belonging to his grandfather, a military dog tag, tarnished with age yet still bearing a name and a history that tied Daniel irrevocably to this secret. Asterisk. The weight of the discovery pressed on him, a mixture of awe and dread. The photograph described in the letters, the betrayal hinted at in the writing. The hidden objects below pointed to a story far darker and more personal than he could have anticipated. Max nudged his arm, insistent, reminding him that he was not alone in facing whatever truths lay within the chest. The cabin, the letters, and the dog had guided him to this revelation, a history that demanded attention, courage, and an understanding of the shadows that had shaped generations. Daniel's breath caught as he realized he was standing at the edge of a story that would change everything he thought he knew about his family. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for the small iron box hidden beneath the letters. The weight of the object was heavier than its size suggested, carrying with it a presence that seemed almost alive. Max sat rigidly beside him, tail stiff, ears twitching, eyes locked on the box as though he understood its importance better than Daniel ever could. The dog nudged his hand with a soft, insistent push, urging him to open it, and Daniel felt the same mixture of fear and curiosity that had gripped him since the first knock in the cabin. He had already uncovered letters, a photograph, and now this a culmination of decades of hidden history, secrets someone had gone to great lengths to bury. Asterisk. The metal lid was cold under his fingertips. Resistant at first, as if testing his resolve, with a small effort, it finally gave way, and the box creaked open, revealing a collection of items carefully tucked inside. Among them lay a tarnished military dog tag, an old, faded journal, and a bundle of papers tied with string, similar to those he had already uncovered. Daniel lifted the dog tag first, brushing away the grime and rust. The name, etched into the metal, sent a chill through him. Samuel Harris. It was his grandfather's tag, worn and dented with age, a tangible relic from a past he had never fully known. Max sniffed the tag, whining softly, and pressed his head against Daniel's arm, a silent reassurance in the midst of an overwhelming discovery. He turned his attention to the journal, its leather cover cracked and worn. Opening it, Daniel found a series of entries written in a deliberate, precise hand. The words, detailed experiences of military service. Yes, but they also hinted at betrayal, hidden alliances, and decisions made under pressure that had left scars on more than just one family. The tone shifted as he read deeper. There was fear, anger, and regret. A sense of someone recording not only their own history, but the consequences of choices that had touched lives beyond their own. Daniel realized he was holding a record of events that had been deliberately hidden, evidence of actions that someone wanted forgotten. The combination of letters, photograph, dog tag, and journal created a story that was both personal and dangerous. A narrative that had waited decades to be unearthed. Max barked suddenly, low and urgent, drawing Daniel's attention to a folded piece of paper at the bottom of the box. He carefully unfolded it, revealing a note written in hurried handwriting. The words were simple but chilling. He found the truth. I had to stop him. I'm sorry. Daniel's breath caught. The handwriting looked familiar, Andy. He realized that the note was signed by someone whose identity sent a shiver down his spine. The betrayal hinted at in the letters and journal now became painfully clear. The story his grandfather had lived, the danger he had faced, and the secrecy surrounding the cabin all converged in this small, iron-bound chest. Max pressed closer again, his body taut, sensing the tension in the room. Daniel's mind raced, connecting the dots between the letters, the photograph, the journal, and now the note. It was a story of loyalty, betrayal, and hidden truths that spanned generations. A legacy that had waited patiently for someone to uncover it. The cabin itself seemed to respond to the revelation, creaking and sighing as if acknowledging the weight of what had been revealed. Daniel knew instinctively that what he had uncovered was more than family history. It was a secret someone had tried desperately to protect. A truth that had been buried to prevent its consequences from reaching the present. The realization pressed on him like a physical weight. The air in the cabin growing heavy and tense. Max nudged his arm, reminding him that he was not alone, and Daniel felt the bond between them deepen, a silent acknowledgement that they had faced this together. He stared down at the contents of the chest, understanding that each item was a piece of a puzzle, and the story of betrayal and secrets hidden beneath the cabin's floorboards was only just beginning to unfold. Daniel's hands lingered over the note, the words still fresh in his mind. Asterisk, he found the truth. I had to stop him. I'm sorry. His pulse quickened as he tried to comprehend the weight of what he held. The note, though short, carried a sense of urgency and remorse that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Max pressed close to his side, ears twitching, tail rigid, sensing the tension in the air. The cabin itself seemed to vibrate with a presence, the walls groaning as if echoing the betrayal contained within the chest. Daniel realized that this secret, hidden for decades beneath the floorboards, was not merely a relic of the past. It was alive, demanding to be acknowledged, understood, and reckoned with. He picked up the dog tag again, turning it over in his hand, the worn metal cool and heavy against his skin. The name Samuel Harris seemed to carry a weight beyond the generations, a story intertwined with loyalty, betrayal, and danger. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine as he connected the dots. The photograph described in the letters, the journal detailing his grandfather's experiences, the dog tag, and now the note. Each piece, a fragment of a narrative that had been deliberately hidden, preserved in the shadows of the cabin for someone like him to discover. Max nudged his arm insistently, almost urging him to continue, to uncover more of the truth that lay waiting in silence. Daniel carefully examined the bottom of the chest once more, discovering a hidden compartment he had not noticed before. Sliding aside a layer of dust and debris, he revealed a small stack of envelopes, yellowed and brittled with age. Each was addressed to Samuel Harris, some in familiar handwriting, others in a script that seemed hurried, anxious. Daniel opened one, and the contents made his blood run cold. It was a letter describing acts of betrayal, names of people his grandfather had trusted, and instructions that were meant to remain secret. The betrayal was not abstracted, was tangible, deliberate, and personal, affecting lives beyond what Daniel had imagined. Max growled softly, backing away slightly, his eyes scanning the shadows of the cabin as if sensing a presence beyond the visible. Daniel realized that he was not merely reading history, he was stepping into it, retracing footsteps that had been hidden in secrecy, navigating the echoes of decisions that had shaped his family's fate. The weight of the discovery was suffocating, but it was accompanied by an undeniable pull, a need to understand the full scope of what had occurred. The dog, ever alert, reminded him that he was not alone in this journey. Max's instincts had led him here, to the edge of a revelation that Daniel could not ignore. As he sorted through the letters and documents, patterns began to emerge. Names repeated, events were corroborated across multiple accounts, and the timeline of betrayal became clearer. Daniel realized that the story his grandfather had lived of loyalty, trust, danger, and hidden truths was far more complex than anything he had been told. It was a narrative of human choices, of actions that had consequences extending decades into the future, consequences that now involved him. Max pressed closer, his warmth, a grounding presence, as Daniel pieced together the story, feeling the emotional weight settle over him. Daniel leaned back against the wall, chest tight, mind racing. The letters, the photograph, the dog tag, and the note had created a tapestry of secrets, a record of betrayal and loyalty intertwined across generations. Each piece illuminated a past that had been deliberately obscured, a history that had remained silent until this moment. The realization hit him. Uncovering this truth was not just about understanding the past. It was about facing the ramifications of it, the consequences that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide, and the responsibility now resting in his hands to confront what had been left behind. Daniel's hands hovered over the last of the letters, the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on his chest. Max sat alert beside him, tail low, ears flicking toward every shadow and sound within the cabin, as if he could sense the tension building in the air. The dog's presence had become more than comforting. It was essential, a guide through the darkness of secrets and betrayal that had been buried for decades. Daniel realized that everything he had uncovered, the letters, the journal, the photograph, the dog tag, the note, was not simply a history lesson. It was a story alive with consequences, reaching across generations. And now it included him. He sifted through the remaining envelopes, carefully opening each one, revealing messages from people who had once been involved in his grandfather's life. Some spoke of loyalty and gratitude. Others hinted at danger, warning of decisions made in haste and trust broken in silence. Daniel felt the emotional weight of every word, the lives touched by choices made decades earlier, the fear and the courage captured in the fading ink. Each revelation added another layer to the cabin story, turning the quiet, abandoned space into a living witness of events that had been carefully concealed from the world. Max went softly, nudging Daniel's arm, reminding him that the dog had been his constant companion, his partner in uncovering what no one else had dared to touch. The deeper Daniel delved, the more he understood the complexity of the betrayal. It wasn't a simple act of deceit. It was a series of calculated moves, a chain reaction of choices that had left scars in places no one could see. He realized that the cabin itself had been a silent guardian of this history, holding secrets in its walls, floorboards, and hidden compartments, waiting for someone persistent enough, someone connected enough, to uncover the truth. Max's instincts had been the key. Without the dog, Daniel might never have discovered the trapdoor, the chest, or the letters. The dog had seen beyond the surface, sensing the history embedded in the very structure of the cabin. As he read the final letter, Daniel noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There was a reference to him, his name mentioned in connection to his grandfather's legacy, a warning and a plea, combined in a way that made the hair on his arms stand on end. The writer had known that one day a descendant would come, someone who could understand, someone who could face the consequences of the past. It was as if the cabin itself had orchestrated the reunion between its secrets and the person destined to uncover them. Daniel felt a chill run through him, the realization sinking in that his presence in this place was not accidental, that the layers of mystery had been waiting specifically for him. Max nudged the chest once more, insistent, and Daniel knew the dog was signaling something he had not yet seen. Reaching in carefully, he lifted a small bundle hidden beneath the letters, a folded photograph, older than any of the others, depicting a scene so intimate and personal that Daniel felt a lump in his throat. The photograph revealed a moment between his grandfather and a man whose face was unmistakably familiar in its resemblance to Daniel himself, a connection he hadn't expected but now understood. Betrayal, loyalty, love, and sacrifice, all of it converged in this single frame, capturing the essence of the story the cabin had held for decades. Daniel leaned back, Max settling close, the warmth of the dog grounding him as he processed the enormity of what he had uncovered. The cabin, with its whispers, shadows, and hidden compartments, had revealed a truth that no one had dared to confront, a secret that intertwined past and present in ways he was only beginning to understand. The letters, the journal, the photograph, and the chests were more than relics. They were evidence of a story that demanded recognition, a revelation that would forever change the way he saw his family, his history, and even himself. Max's eyes met his, filled with a quiet understanding, as if to say that together they had uncovered something no one else could have faced alone. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing just slightly, yet the weight of the truth remained. He realized that this cabin, which had seemed abandoned and haunted, was not merely a place to escape. It was a conduit, a keeper of secrets, and a mirror reflecting the courage and resilience required to face what had been hidden. The dog had guided him every step of the way, and now, standing amid the shadows, letters, and relics of a past long concealed, Daniel understood that some secrets demand discovery, some truths demand courage, and some connections like the one between him and Max are what make the impossible possible. If this story gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more haunting true tales and mysterious stories like this one. And remember, the scariest secrets are the ones buried closest to home.